Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stress Free IEP, the show where we help families build their village so they can raise their neurodivergent children with confidence, clarity, and support. I'm your host, Frances Schefter, special education attorney, advocate, and a fellow parent walking this journey with you. Whether you're joining us live on Facebook or YouTube or listening later on your favorite podcast app, we're so glad you're here. Let's dive in and meet today's amazing guest. Justin H. Dove is a proud product of The Ohio State University, where he earned his bachelor's, master's, and ed specialist degrees. His professional journey as a school psychologist has spanned diverse educational settings in Ohio, Georgia, and California for more than 15 years. Through his company, Peace Ed, he now partners with families, school districts, and other educational entities to provide a range of services as a licensed educational psychologist. Personally, he endeavors to embody and uplift the words of Dr. Charles A. Barrett. It's always about the children. Justin, I love that. Thank you so much for being here. And that's like everything about my firm is about the kids, right?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I wish I had come up with that mantra, but it's one that I'm very happy to embrace.
Yeah, 100%. Because it is. I mean, like that's like at absolutely everything we do, looking at our future. It's about the children because
Yeah,
that's where our future is, and we're not going to have one if we don't invest in them.
indeed, indeed. The children are the future, a great singer once said. And so I certainly believe that. And the work of education has to be about the betterment and the growth and the progress of children. We can remove adult egos and all of that stuff. We have to remove that to prioritize the kids that we're here to serve.
Yeah, and remove all the excuses of like we know,
That too.
like we know. Yes, the budgets have been cut. Yes, it's hard to
Yes.
get people hired, but if we take that step back and say, okay, fine, we can't do it perfect the way it should be,
Hmm.
but let's let go of all everything else and focus on the children themselves and how to educate the children. That's where we'll come up with creative ideas,
And
right?
I love the emphasis on creativity because so often in education we get stuck in our ways. Well, that's the way we've always done it. That's the pathway we've always taken. But sometimes we need to think outside of the box to meet a child's unique needs. And the way we've always done it will give us the outcomes that we've always had. Which, when you look at the research on special education and some of these things, some of these outcomes aren't necessarily what I would call the best. So if we want more, if we want to improve, perhaps we should do things a little differently or be open to the idea of doing things a bit differently.
Right. Yeah, and it's I know our older people are gonna not like when I say this, but my husband and I were even talking about this the other day about right now, the time difference between now and the '80s is the same as from the '80s and the '40s, right?
That's
And
that's
if we take that step right?
that's
And
quite
take
a
that
thought.
step back, in the '80s, how ancient was the '40s?
Yes.
And yes, as my husband pointed out, the technology boom has been huge, but it's still that look at the difference in that 40-year time frame. And
Yeah.
yes, we've always done education like this. When you're talking
Yeah.
about the general education curriculum and how we teach, that doesn't make it right still, right?
No, and it's not serving today's kids, in the environment that they're living in. And so the way we've always done it, we can certainly keep the things that still work, but just to say we will continue this in perpetuity is not the way that we should go about education moving forward.
Right. Yeah, and it's taking that one step at a time. And so, like, I know, like, for special education, that has changed dramatically in the 40 years and definitely for the better. I was on one of my shorts and something we were talking about it and how the the it used to be so taboo, special education.
Hmm.
Like when I was growing up, like, oh, well, if you're labeled special education, you're never going to go to college. And that's so not true. So, like, what like, as a school psychologist, I guess putting it in that perspective, like, what do you see that parents could do better in IEP meetings to advocate for their child and why that's so important?
I think one of the, and this may be somewhat of a controversial opinion, but one of the first suggestions I might give to a family that's entering an IEP meeting, and this is something that I would do with my own child. My daughter will be 3, so if she were needing, the types of supports that are provided through an IEP, I would take this advice as well. But when we think about going to any other sort of space where there's a lot of rules and regulations and sort of esoteric knowledge. So think about going to court or something of that nature. Would you ever enter a courtroom without a lawyer? Probably not, if you would want good outcomes. And it's not even that you don't necessarily trust the system, but you just want someone that sort of knows how to navigate what can be a nebulous process. And so for IEPs, for special education eligibility meetings, whatever it may be, I do. I think it's wise to have an advocate in the room, even if that advocate is just a family member who used to be a special education teacher or used to be a speech language pathologist or is a school psychologist or someone who sort of knows the inside baseball, if you will, to ensure that your child's needs are being met. And so when I say that, it's very important to qualify that the advocate shouldn't just be an advocate that wants to have conflict for the sake of conflict, because there are
Yeah.
folks like that out there. The advocate should be someone who is genuinely interested in partnering with the school team to ensure that the child's needs are prioritized and that the child's needs are met. And so that is just, I think, a foundational recommendation that I think is very wise. And nowadays, obviously, with AI and all of the information that's out there, parents can become very informed on these things. But there's nothing like someone who's been on the inside who can
Yeah.
help you say, okay, hey, that's a red flag, or is there another way we can go about doing this, or is there something we're not considering here? I think that's very wise.
And I agree 100%. And I think that's what the lawmakers had in mind when in IDEA they put that the parents have a right to bring a person of knowledge.
Yes,
And it's the only area of law that a person of knowledge doesn't have to be an attorney.
this is true. This is true. You don't need a special education attorney as your advocate. Now,
Right.
there are particular moments in perhaps your journey where you might need that type of support, but on the front end for an IEP meeting, you don't necessarily need that level of
Right.
assistance.
And that's what I say often is that like I love advocates. They are 100%, they have a position, they have a place.
Yes,
Be careful about how you choose your advocate though, because
very,
anybody
very
can come
careful.
out and say, I'm an advocate with no
Yes.
training, with no anything. And just because you're a special ed teacher doesn't make you an advocate.
No.
Yes, right? Because you know your little area, but there's so much more
Mhm.
to know. And it's for parents having that extra person. There's a lot of terminology, a lot of language, a lot of little things that are said in an IEP meeting that
Yes.
if you don't know what you're listening for, it's something that could be a huge impact later without realizing it.
Yes.
And schools, I mean, all professionals, I shouldn't even say schools, but they have a tendency to forget all the knowledge they have
Mhm.
and zip through stuff without fully explaining to the parent. And they're going so fast, parents don't always have the wait a minute. Can you explain this? Whereas having the advocate with you or having another person with you can help. Whoa, wait a minute. Slow down. And what does this really mean?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Unfortunately, in special education, we become somewhat bogged down in our alphabet soup. So there are a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of sort of jargon that is used that I would encourage special educators to avoid as much as possible. I just speak plainly, speak directly, because that's going to ensure that families can be informed participants in the process in which they're legally required to be a participant in.
Right.
But having someone that sort of understands that language, that lingo, can certainly give you, greater access to the space.
Yeah. And, I'm thinking back to one of the IEP meetings I was in because, I'm an advocate also. Just I have my
Yes.
master's in special ed. I taught, I was LEA. There was this one IEP meeting that I'm trying to remember. It was either the case manager or the school psychologist, but the two of us just got on the same page and were like,
Okay.
and like adjusted. And then I went, oh, wait a minute. Sorry. And turned to my client, like, do you need us to explain this better? Because it
Yes.
was just, I went into the educator mode, and it's just so easy to slip into that mode and know that we're doing the right thing for the child. But wait a minute, the parent needs to know what we're doing here.
And that's an important point. If the parent is not, parent or guardian is not an equal partner in this support process, then that's more likely something that's being imposed on them, as opposed to them having agency to say, okay, I listened to it, I understand it, and I agree to it. Not just I'm sort of trusting you as the expert to figure it out. That's not really empowerment. And I think the IEP process should be about empowerment, both to the parents and guardians as well as the child.
Yeah, 100%. And I say it often to parents because I know, both my kids are on IEPs. It's overwhelming for me sometimes too, going into the IEP meetings.
Yes.
It's a lot because you're hearing a lot of negative about your child and how your child's not normal per se,
Mhm.
and all of this. And it's challenging, but it's taking the step back and knowing you as the parent in that room, your child best,
Yes.
period. Period. And
Parents
you
have
might not,
parents have
yeah,
expertise. Yes,
yeah.
parents have expertise, and I try to enter every conversation, every interaction with a parent or guardian with that foundational belief that parents want what's in the best interest of their child, and they have a unique expertise in their child's needs that I need to listen to, listen to understand, not just listen to respond. I need to really integrate that into my conceptualization of, the evaluation or whatever it is, the consultation relationship, because that there's value in that. There's a side of their child that only that parent or guardian will see. And when we understand that and utilize that information and see those strengths and leverage those strengths, we're likely to make more progress in school or and what have you.
And that it's also that the parents are seeing the children in different environments.
Yeah.
And it used to be, it's not as much as it was, although still sometimes that it's like, oh, well, if it's happening at home, that's a home problem. That's not a school, right? It's not a
Yeah.
school
Yeah.
problem. But the reality is the IEP and what we're learning in school isn't just so we can function in school. The reality is we are preparing our children to launch into adult life.
Yes.
And so if they're doing something in school, but
Hmm.
not generalizing it outside of school,
That's a
that's
problem.
a problem.
That's a
And
problem.
we need to communicate as a team of what's happening and how to make this happen so that the child does have that opportunity to generalize and understands, oh, wait a minute, it's not only when I'm in school that I have to do X, Y, and Z. I also
Hmm.
have to do that at home, maybe when I go to religious services or at a
Yes.
restaurant, but I can do different the way I behave at recess. I can behave outside playing with my friends, but I
Yes.
can't behave like that in a restaurant, right?
Yeah, that's important, that generalization. And it really, you think about, well, why would we even discuss at a certain point transition planning if all we need to be concerned about is what a child is doing in school? Well, I think there's this understanding, to your point, that we're helping to prepare a child for what comes next after school. And I think for kids who don't have IEPs, we sort of get that. Well, what is all of this learning and these experiences helping to build and helping to prepare you for? But for special education, sometimes we lose that. So yes, we want to make sure that the kids that we're supporting are prepared for whatever comes next, whether that's post-secondary education, whether that's vocational school, whatever that looks like. And that's going to look very different across the spectrum of kids who receive special education services. But it's something that we need to have in mind even before the law says we need to start talking about transition.
Right, exactly. And so I know, like, as a psychologist, this is something as parents we talk about a lot. Like, how do you talk to your child about their disability? And should you
Mm.
talk to your child about the disability?
I'm a firm believer in having conversations, age appropriate and cognitively congruent conversations with children about the way their brains work. And so I would like to shout out Dr. Liz Engoff, who I think is really leading the way in giving us frameworks or talking about different types of disabilities with children. Again, this goes to my feeling that special education, gifted education, whatever it might be, is something that we should be doing with a child as opposed to a child. It should not be imposed on them. It should be in partnership with them. And if you don't understand who you are or why you may struggle with certain things and why you may excel with others, then you're left to just assume that you're lazy or you're not working hard enough or you're dumb or you're stupid or whatever, whatever the case may be. But when someone thoughtfully, in an honest and affirming manner, introduces you to why certain things might be more difficult, but why you have this special interest in trains or whatever the case may be. It gives you the full picture of how your brain works. That's empowerment. And that's the type of information that can help a child learn to advocate for themselves and their needs over the course of their life. Again, thinking about some level of independence to the maximum extent appropriate and possible for each child. So yes, I think we should at the earliest ages be having, again, age appropriate, cognitively congruent, honest and affirming conversations about the way children, how their brains work, and then why they're receiving the support that they receive in school.
100%. And, I think back to when my kids were being evaluated, I said to them, like, they're like, why do we need to do this? I'm like, well, we're going to a doctor to see how your brain works because everybody's brain works differently. And we're just going to figure out how your brain works. So to see how you learn better. They're like, okay. And so we come back with the diagnoses and I'm sitting with my older one and talking about autism and what it means and that her brain works differently. And she went, but Mom, you said everybody's brain works differently. Yes, you are right. But I'm like, okay, she got me. I love this kid. But, some kids are grouped as autism because their brains work differently in a similar way.
Yeah.
She's like, okay. And so she kind of got it. And then I took it the step farther and I said, I went and looked, of course, ChatGPT. What famous people have autism?
Yes.
And which I didn't know, I found out that the creator of Pokemon has
Wow,
autism.
I didn't know that.
Exactly. And so she was very into Pokemon at that time. So I said, well, hey, here's an example. The creator of Pokemon, I don't remember his name, has autism. And she went, oh, really? And just took the negativity out of it. You know what I mean? Like
there's connection there.
Exactly. And I feel like when I was a kid, it was like special ed was that taboo. You didn't talk about it. It wasn't, it wasn't acceptable. And now it's like, I can't tell you how many, my younger daughter tells me, she's like, oh yeah, I met so-and-so. And she said, oh, I have ADHD. Do you have ADHD too? Like it's normalizing it all, right?
Yeah, we've made a lot of progress with normalizing neurodiversity and neurodivergence specifically. And I think we've come a long way. However, I still see room for growth. And so we need to consistently, be reflecting on how we can improve. I think in too many schools today, special education is still a place as opposed to a continuum of service options. And so we need to get away from the segregation of special education and really think about what inclusion really means and looks like, not just from a mindset standpoint or theory standpoint, but then also how do we design school buildings, modern school buildings, in a way where we can meaningfully include students with disabilities, including those with significant support and accessibility needs in spaces with their non-disabled peers. Because when you look at many, school buildings, they're designed in a way where, okay, that's the special education pod, that's the special education room, that's the general education room. You don't have a lot of sensory, tools and things of that nature in quote unquote general education rooms. So again, to your earlier point, thinking outside the box, not just doing things the way we've always done them. As we think about building a new school building, we need to be having these conversations about how can we make this inclusive as a first step, as opposed to something that we try to reverse engineer.
Exactly. And, that just brought up to me of, the home and hospital. In today's technological world, there is no reason that there should be home and hospital in the sense of one-on-one instruction type situation. There is no reason for some of our kids that we can't set up that the child can virtually be in the classroom with the
Yeah.
teacher, learning
Yeah.
with their peers. Like, there's no excuse. Yes, we understand, okay, maybe if their illness, it doesn't allow it on a regular basis, but okay, so once in a while is still
Yeah.
better than in isolation with nothing.
I
And
agree. What does it mean to meaningfully include a child to the maximum extent possible and appropriate in an educational setting with their non-disabled peers? And the benefit is not just for the students with disabilities, but it's also for the students without disabilities. We live in a world with diversity, neurodiversity, racial diversity, cultural diversity, economic diversity, all types of diversity. And I would argue that that brings value to the human experience
yeah,
on all sides. And so we need to think that way as it relates to disability.
yeah. And inclusion, it's a lot of the school systems, at least in Maryland, I know some do and some are leaning towards trying to move towards total inclusion, which is great in theory if it's done right. And if it's appropriate for the child we're thinking about. The problem that I'm seeing with the school systems is they're like, "Oh, we're a total inclusion school system." That's not gonna work ever.
And
There
that's not legally appropriate when it means
Yep,
that we're just mainstreaming children. If by total inclusion or full inclusion you mean that you're just throwing kids with unique needs that we've documented and that are we're legally required to meet into general education settings and not giving them the supports that they need, that's not consistent with the law. That's not actually inclusion. Uh, but if we're going to be thinking creatively to ensure that the students' needs are being met while they are having increased levels of contact with students who don't have disabilities, then that is inclusion. So um, we need to really interrogate these terms and these buzzwords that are being
yep.
thrown out there to say, what does that look like in practice? And is that really beneficial to the kids that we're supporting?
And it's also looking at each individual child like it's supposed to be,
Yes.
and what works, does it work, how does it work? So, I know with alternative learning outcomes, certificate track, off high school diploma, everybody's like, "Oh, they can't be in general education classrooms." That's not true. They're
Yeah.
not gonna do the same curriculum, but there's no reason that if if the class is learning multiplication, for example, and
Mhm.
we have a child that multiplication is not where the child is, they're just matching numbers, that they can't still be matching the numbers. The class is doing 3 times 4 is 6, and they're matching 3 and 4 and 6. They don't have to get the concept, but that's how they're doing it, and they're feeling included in that own way, if it's okay for the child. I've had
Yes.
students that, you know what I mean? There's students there that know they're different, know they're doing something different, and it doesn't feel right or feel good for them. So it's not okay. And so that wouldn't work. But I have other students that have, clients that have been, they don't care. They just want to be with their friends. And
Yes.
as long as they're being successful what they're doing, it doesn't matter to them that it's something different than everybody else.
Yeah, so the I think the key piece here to emphasize is individualized.
Yeah.
So we need to be making individualized case by case decisions about how to best support children and where they will receive the maximum benefit. And so that's not a one size fits all approach. That's not saying, oh, our kids with IEPs can only be included in the lunchroom or only be
Yeah.
included when we have assemblies or whatever the case may be. No, it's what do we know about this child and what they need and who they are and what their strengths are, and then how can we, to the maximum extent possible and appropriate for this child, integrate them into the fabric of the school community in a way that offers benefit, meaningful benefit to them.
Exactly, and that's the key, meaningful benefit. Meaningful
Yeah.
benefit doesn't have to be academic. It can be
There.
social. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
and I think that's been like the biggest key and the biggest issue I've had recently, especially like with our 2E kids, is that the old school thought process is educational impact means academically not doing well.
No.
And that's not, right? We know this, it's not. And just because there is academic difficulties doesn't mean you can't get meaningful benefit from being with your gen ed peers.
Yeah, and it pains me. I've been doing some contracting work over the last couple of years for different school districts, and sometimes, I just hear some of the younger school psychologists having these conversations and perpetuating these myths, and it really pains me. To your point about, well, their academics are fine, so they don't qualify. Well, what about social emotional? What about executive functioning? What about behavior? So I just we need to always question our traditions, our rituals, our mythology in the field to say, okay, is that just what I've heard, or is that what the law actually says? And that's something I've taken very seriously over the course of my career, is always wanting to question, what are my beliefs and where are they coming? Where can I turn to support these beliefs? Is it the law? Is it just what my practicum supervisor said or my internship supervisor said? Is it just what I heard in the field? Well, no, we need to be supported with what the law says and what's in the best interest for kids. And having a very rigid and narrow view of educational impact is not in the best interest of many of our children, including twice exception students.
Yeah. And I've seen that, one of my shorts with the psychologist saying that the school psychologist doesn't make the final decision on eligibility.
No, it's a
Right.
team
I
decision.
got so much slack for that because the psychologist's like, we're the ones that have the degrees and wrote 30 to 40-page reports and we know the child best. And I'm like, but no, you don't,
The IEP, yeah, and that's another. We have to disabuse ourselves of these myths and these notions that somehow the school psychologist can make a unit. There are no unilateral decisions in special education. That I would not even want to be on an island making a unilateral decision in special education because of how dangerous that could be. Um, I have expertise. I'm the qualified examiner. I provide recommendations for the team to consider, but ultimately the IEP team makes the decision. And that's something that the law is very clear about. So, while teams often defer to our expertise and say, hey, which way is this going? We need to make sure that they fully understand the rationale behind that recommendation so that if they are asked to explain it, they understand it, they agree with it as well. Because if they don't, that needs to be documented too.
Right. Exactly. And I've had psychologists get dug into their ways. I mean, I had one, it was kind of funny actually, that was dead set saying that switching a child's code from autism to developmental delay made sense.
Hmm.
Why? Right? And like she's like, well, in my 30 years in my 30 years experience, blah, 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 blah. And I just looked at her, I said, well, in my 35 years experience and with my master's in special education, and like just shut her up because like
Yeah.
it shouldn't be about that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care what your education is. Here's the reality. I have a difference of opinion. We're talking as a team. Your education and your degrees don't belong here in this room.
Yeah. I think what's far more important to emphasize in these conversations, whether they be, conflictual conversations or whatever the case may be, is what do the data say? So what is the information that we're basing whatever the recommendation is on? And then what is the legal support for that final recommendation? And so it's not a matter of degrees. It's not a matter of years of experience. It's a matter of data
Yep.
and the law. And so if we can support whatever it is we're saying with both of those things, then whether you are an advocate off the street or you're the school psychologist with 50 years of experience, you're fine.
Right. And that's, the lawmakers were very, very specific when they made who's required to make up an IEP team.
Yeah.
Because it was somebody that can interpret the data, which is usually school psychologist, but not always. Special education teacher who knows how to modify curriculum, how to make accommodations with supplementary aids. General education teacher that knows the general education curriculum,
Yes.
the LEA, which is your administrator, and then your related service providers, and the parent. Let's not forget the parent.
Let's
And
not
here's
forget
the
the
thing.
parent.
It does not say, here's the order of priority. It's these are the legal required members.
It's a
We're
team.
all equal.
Yeah. It's a team.
It's King Arthur's table. We're at a round table, right?
Yeah. And each of those folks has a unique area of expertise, and they're bringing a particular lens to the conversation that, when considered in collaboration, you're likely to have better outcomes than just leaning on one individual.
Right.
Because we all have limitations in our view. Some folks call that blind spots, whatever you wish to call it, but no one knows everything. So we are stronger together than we are individually. And that's what,
Exactly.
that's the beauty of a a fine-tuned and well-oiled IEP team.
Exactly. And it's, I'm thinking back to one of the comments about the psychologist saying, well, we're the ones that know if there's educational impact. I'm like, you've met with the child 3 to 4 hours, and the classroom teacher doesn't know better than you that's with them 6 hours a day. Like, it was just, well, the funny thing after that is somebody's like, wow, your psychologist spends 3 to 4 hours when doing evaluations. And they're like, we're lucky if we get an hour. And I'm like, okay, that's
Mm,
scary. But like, there is all of that different level. But again, like, the psychologist is looking at the psychologist lens, and
yeah.
the classroom teacher is looking at it through the classroom teacher lens. And that's the importance, bringing it all together.
And what I've always prided myself on, and when I'm, mentoring or talking to other school psychologists in the field, is that the best evaluations are comprehensive, and so that includes not just the testing that you as a psychologist do for that hour or 2 hours, whatever it may be, but also your observations in the classroom, also your interviews with the teacher, with the parent, with related service providers, with community-based therapists, or whoever else might be involved, and then also your record review. What does the documentation say? Is it consistent with some of your findings? Because the mistake would be, oh well, we had a test and the score was this, and you ignore all of that other information, that rich information from the teacher, from the report cards, from all the data that exists, because you didn't get the score that you thought would be needed, and what have you. No, you take all of that information into
Right.
account, you synthesize it, and then you make recommendations to the team that are supported by the richness of that data.
Right. And that's it is the thing, is that it's, if a kid's having a bad day, the day that they take the psychological, they're doing the assessments, how is that going to impact things?
That
You
can
know,
shift your results. Yes,
right. And then
significantly.
the other thing I have is with, especially with our autism kids, well, with almost all of our kids are kids. They're going to do
Yes.
what they want and not do what they don't want to do. Right. And when doing a test, a psychological test, the WISC or the W, whichever one they're doing, is it that the child can't do it, or the child's refusing to do it? Because there's a big difference. And
These are all important questions, and so again, I like to, before I bring out a test kit, have a conversation with the child about what we'll be doing, why we'll be doing it, who I am, what do I do. Again, inviting them into the process, again, as a means of promoting more engagement, more cooperation. But then there's also, and this is somewhat inside, language, but there's certain types of tests called performance validity tests that psychologists can give to differentiate whether scores are a function of a child just not trying, or a child actually putting their best foot forward. A lot of times those types of tests aren't included in traditional school-based psychoeducational evaluations, which is why in some cases a family might wish for that second opinion, which I'm sure we'll touch on at some point.
yeah, the IAEs. And that's it's always interesting, because it used to be that when I would have clients request an individual education evaluation, that schools usually just granted it, because it was easier for them to grant it than for them to file for due process against the parent.
Fund or file.
Right, exactly. And so, but more recently, I've actually had school systems filing against my clients, which in those cases, I usually tell my clients, it's not worth fighting it. Just go pay for your own, because it's cheaper, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but it's hard. I know for me, sometimes it's hard. And I don't like to say, well, you didn't do a good job, you're not a good psychologist, when asking for an IEE. But that's not what it's about. It's that the
No.
report came out with something different than what we've seen. And so we think it needs to be something different. Um, and that again is where you said earlier, adults need to get rid of their egos. And
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
He had,
it doesn't have to be, you don't have to take it personal. I know as a school, back when I had the first IE request that I was involved in, initially, you're hurt. You're like, oh, I did my best with this evaluation. But it may not even be necessarily that the parent disagrees with your findings. They just may want to feel more comfort and have confirmation that this is indeed, these are high stakes decisions about children and their educational experiences in their lives. And so the law doesn't even require a family to specify why they're requesting the IE in the initial request. They can just say, "I would like a second opinion," and so
yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that. It's a form of quality control. It's a form of accountability, and I have a great respect for my school-based school psychologists out there, and I think the vast majority of them are doing their best, doing good work.
yeah,
But a lot of professionals, their caseloads are out of control. They can't necessarily give the individualized attention to each child that they may wish to under ideal circumstances. And so sometimes just having someone who can just focus on this one child, do a really in-depth and thorough evaluation, it can supplement the information you've already collected. It doesn't necessarily have to detract from or dismiss the information you provided. It may just help you see the child more fully. And so I would really encourage professionals just to have humility, through that process and say, okay, this is a second opinion. Let me look at it objectively. And how can we use this data to better understand and support this child?
and it's also like school psychologists, like, we know time is such a factor. They're overworked, we know this, and they don't have the time to build the rapport that's needed sometimes,
Not always, no.
right?
A lot of
And
times, yeah, you're just bombarded and overloaded with evaluations and timelines and things of this nature. So, kudos to the school psychologists out there trying to do the best they can under less than ideal circumstances. But again, families always have the right to that IE, that second opinion, and it's not something that should be seen as an insult or a slight to the professionals who perhaps contributed to the initial evaluation.
exactly. And it's also the kid could have been having a bad day or just didn't mesh with the psychologist. There's nothing
That
wrong with
part,
the, you know what I
that part
mean?
is,
Like,
these are true.
and it's all factors that you take into place, which is, I mean, don't get me started on standardized tests because I was never a good test taker. And so,
It's
so
that
for
piece.
me, standardized tests are just whatever. They're what they are. But if you're having a bad day on the day you're taking that standardized test,
Mhm.
that's the end of it. It's not like you get to make it up. And that's why it's one piece of the data that we're
One
using
one
to make
piece,
determinations. Yeah.
one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. It's school systems need to change. I think we all know that. Um, how? I don't know because it needs such a complete overhaul. I don't know how to. Okay, let's just stop educating for a year to get it all right and then start, like, that's not going to work. But I think one child at a time, we can start making that difference.
Yeah, we each have a reach, and so we can make a ripple in the ocean. And granted, that ocean is vast and expansive, but we all have the ability to contribute positively to whatever space we find ourselves in. And so, whether you're a school psychologist, speech language pathologist, occupational therapist, regular education teacher, special education teacher, parent, community provider, whatever it is you're contributing to this world, I would implore us all to, really reflect on how can I contribute positively, as opposed to negatively. And I think if we all do that, we're likely to see these larger scale changes and shifts that we would hope for.
Agree. And so I know we didn't even touch on your company a little bit. So Peace Ed, tell me a little bit about Peace Ed and what you do within that.
Yeah. For the majority of my career, I've been a school-based provider. As you said, and starting in Ohio, spending some time in Georgia, and then also in California in public charter schools as well as a private school. But a couple of years ago, I made the decision after getting licensed as a licensed educational psychologist, which allows school psychologists to practice privately in the state of California. I found myself wanting more and wanting to provide maybe more customized services to families. And so I created this entity called Peace Ed, which is sort of a tie in to my last name of Dove. and also just wanting educational spaces where children's needs are being met and children are being empowered. And I would like to say, or like to think, that that would be a more peaceful world, more peaceful educational spaces. But yes, I provide private pay evaluations, independent educational evaluations, those IEEs that we talked about, counseling services, special education advocacy in the state of California primarily, but the advocacy piece can even be broader than that, and consultation services and presentations. And so really just trying to be of service. That is a core value of mine. In California primarily, but across the country, to families who may have questions or wish to have the support of someone who sort of understands how things work on the inside.
Awesome. And before we go on to the next question, I see that we have a comment about a requirement of case managers informing parents of major changes to supports that are being proposed prior to the IEP meeting. So prior to the IEP meeting, you should be getting a draft IEP that should have supplementary aids, services, so forth. I know in Montgomery County, especially mainly in Maryland, they don't put services on the draft IEP because they think it's predetermination. Which is frustrating because, yeah, if the school is talking about changing placement or putting a child in more special ed than in gen ed, that's a major change that parents aren't always prepared for. So it's not necessarily if it's services because the way the law is written, but I will tell you, if you go into an IEP meeting and the school dumps on you or you're not aware of, and they say, oh, well, we're thinking about going to a more restrictive environment, you can stop the meeting and say, I need
Yes.
time to process this. I need support with this. And, we need to get back together another time because I wasn't prepared for this. And there's nothing wrong with that. They can't plow through. So prior to the IEP meeting, it's a little questionable on what they're required to, but if they jump something at you, and I've done it before as an attorney, like we weren't prepared to talk about this right now. It was nowhere in the letter of invitation saying that you were going to talk about placement. So even if you didn't, you need to at least tell them you're talking about placement, even if you're not saying what the placement change is. So I hope that answers your question, LDRC. And then to bring it back to you, Justin, sorry, so for people to get in touch with you, if they're like, this is the person for me, I get it, he gets it, I'm in California, or as we know, advocate anywhere over across, the country, how should people get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, so I will share my contact information with you. Hopefully, we can attach that to the session and whatnot. But my email, my website rather, is peaceed4success.com. So PEACEED, the number 4 success.com. And so you can book a complimentary consultation call. I offer 30-minute consultation calls for free. If you just want to kind of run some ideas by me or just kind of pick my brain on something. To see if this is a good fit, or perhaps I can lead you in a different direction with different referrals. So please feel free to reach out and consider me part of your extended village because we need that in special education and life in general.
Yeah, no, thank you. And yes, all the links will be below. Thank you so much, Justin. This has been amazing. And I have to say, I love how you did Dove Peace Ed. That's just such a great, I love it. I love when things connect without being as obvious, but powerful.
Yeah. I think peace is what I hope to seek and achieve and contribute to in all aspects of life, certainly education.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for the invitation, Francis. It's nice to meet you and be in conversation with you today.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Stress Free IEP. We hope today's conversation gave you new tools, insights, or just a little more peace of mind as you support your neurodivergent child. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone in your village. Next week, we're going to have episode 159, where Kayla Ireland is going to talk about cerebral palsy, inclusion, and being heard. You can always learn more and connect with me at schefterlaw.com or follow along on social media. Until next time, remember, you do not have to do it all alone.